They say friendships are formed by being at the right place at the right time, a circumstance that happens to us, a sheer coincidence. But I don't think that's the case. People come into our lives for a reason, for a purpose that is much larger than we know or are able to see. Friendships are the essence of connection. They are the links that make us stronger as individuals and collectively together. Yet it's how we choose to build those friendships, those relationships and bonds that can prosper into something incredibly special over the course of time. My name is Roger Brooks. I do not take friendships lightly. I have made many friends over the course of my lifetime, some more recent, but many that date back to my childhood and high school years. As part of my mission to raise global consciousness, I'll be sharing many of my friends' stories with you here. How could I not? These incredible people have not only made a profound impact on my life, but they are making an impact on countless others, and in the process, are changing the world. Their stories will challenge you and your thoughts and will make you look deep within yourself, which just may empower you to make modifications in your own life and a difference in the lives of those around you. What started out as a hobby has quickly turned into my life mission. Join me on this journey to help make the world a better place.
A lot of stuff people do well, I don't, and then there's other stuff that I do really well. So in this later phase of my life, I've been trying to understand how that hangs together. I mean, I didn't get published for years, for those of you listening. I don't think I got anything published for almost 7 years. I mean, I was writing in the dark, and some things were popping up now and again. Certainly for 2 or 3 years, couldn't even get oh yeah, we'll consider that. I mean, the stack of rejection letters I have saved is awesome. And then back then, people sent you actual rejection letters. Sure. When a person owns their own, not just can tell a story, but owns their story, it gives them more confidence and more opportunity. And you need to own your story also so that you can overcome the things that hold you back. But consistency is a thing, and I think part of understanding your story and telling your story is that you're paying attention to it. There's certain stuff you preach or talk about, and hopefully you live it.
On this week's episode of American Real, we bring you award-winning author and my old high school friend, Ben Tanzer. Ben brings us to an intimate place of the personal narrative, beginning with the importance of finding and eventually owning your own story in order to gain confidence, which leads to opportunity. Ben discusses the competitive world of writing and how he took his stack of rejection letters from publishers as motivation, eventually being published 7 times over. Ben and I talk about his live tribe experience at American Real and what he took away from it over the 21-day cycle. Ben Tanzer is a guy that lights up the room with his presence, and I hope you come away a better person, as I did, from this thought-provoking conversation. Now, if you're interested in finding your voice and sharing your story, I'd like to personally invite you to join our live tribe and take our 21-day challenge in our free private Facebook group. Your challenge will be to post a live 60-second video each day for 21 straight days to build skills of confidence, commitment, leadership, and accountability, all while growing your network with like-minded people from around the world. You'll quickly see how turning up each day gives you more clarity, purpose, and transparency to become your best self. American Real wants to connect you with other high achievers and provide you with the tools you need to become more present and focused in valuing the power of your own story. Click on the link below to join American Real Live Tribe 21 and start your 21-day challenge today. And now, without further ado, I bring to you Mr. Ben Tanzer. This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks, and today my very special guest is Ben Tanzer, storyteller, journalist, and award-winning author. You are a lecturer in the Loop program, and for 17 years you worked at Prevent Child Abuse America, where for a portion you served as the Senior Director of Communications. You also oversaw the launch of the Montana Institute's blog and social media platforms to craft content and uncover their voice. You are a recent graduate of our 21-day challenge, and on your website you say, I help people tell their stories. And today, Ben, we want to hear yours. Ben Tanzer, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thanks so much for having me here. It's really an honor. It's terrific to be home. We're doing this in Binghamton, one of my favorite places. I have not been here in ages, so thanks, brother. I really appreciate the interest. I'm thrilled to do it.
Oh, absolutely. And we have lots to cover today, but you mentioned you're back home. Tell us, what is it like coming back home? How do you feel? How does it make you feel?
I mean, it's funny. My mom will always say this. I'm always like very nostalgic, and I'm wrapped up in nostalgia all the time. So it takes very little for me to trigger memories of childhood and other times. So to actually be here where, I was born in DC, but we moved here when we were in maybe kindergarten or preschool. So I spent my whole childhood here all the way through the end of high school. And it's very moving. I mean, every turn has a piece of history, and every turn is like, oh, I worked there, or that was that building. We've only been here for 24 hours so far, but it's incredible. I mean, it's funny because people talk about how they grew up and where they grew up. And I've been living in big cities now for 25 years, but such a good childhood here. And there's so many things about Binghamton I love. So it's been really interesting being out of Broome. We were out of Broome last night. Then we were at Remlick. So we're like, all those places were places I didn't necessarily spend time. Remlicks didn't exist, but every turn is somewhere, we went running, or we went to a party, or I'd like to say we were studying, but I'm not sure I was doing that back then. So anyway, it's really wonderful to be home. I've been very moved. I really have. And
your wife and two children, do you talk to them about any of the old times here?
I really do. I mean, it's funny. My kids are at that age where they really don't care. It's not just they don't care. They don't want to hear any more stories. You said storyteller. I'm definitely like my dad. Love telling stories. Always told stories. Never thought about it formally until more recently. But I tell them you got to picture this. We're raising two boys in a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Chicago. And I'm trying to tell them about Binghamton. I mean, I really think they think I'm a hick, which is great. And it's so funny because I don't think that was the case growing up. Maybe we were kind of townies since there's a university here. Right. But it's really great. They don't care. But then, of course, they remember everything. So right. I just keep telling the stories and they keep ignoring me and telling me to shut up. And I think we have a good balance going.
And you mentioned SUNY Broome last night. You were all there. Your family and friends were there for an art exposition of your father's work, Michael Tanzer. Tell us about that. That was remarkable.
Yeah, that actually I was surprisingly, I shouldn't say I'm surprising. I'm actually, super, I'm very prone to being emotional, so that's not like a big surprise. That's another thing my kids find hilarious, how quick I can cry at something. But my dad was a local artist. He was born in the Bronx, and he went to this wonderful school for about a year and a half, the Frank Riley School. He's a legendary teacher and artist. This would have been back in the 60s. My parents ended up here in trying to do all the math here, early 70s we must have moved up here. And he became a local and regional artist, always had bigger aspirations, always did his thing, never really followed patterns or tradition, painted what he loved to paint. And we could do an hour on that. Fast forward, now 30 years, he passed away about 18 years ago, but friends of his, friends of our family, really our extended family here, they bought one of his paintings. They heard it was coming up at auction. They wanted it. Some private collector had owned it. I don't know what that means. A lot of people own his work. We don't know where it is. This painting, which we saw last night, I don't recognize at all. But it's a Binghamton painting, and it's interesting. He really was, a Binghamton storyteller. Here he was just like, he never even seemed like he got off the street. And I say that as a compliment. Like, he really always seemed like a very Jewy New York guy that he was. I loved him to death. And anyway, they bought this painting, and they were in this huge auction house. And the painting looked like a normal size, but it isn't. It's absolutely enormous. And so they couldn't get it home. They had to have it delivered. It was too big for their house. They live in a big house, but it dwarfed everything. And so they were like, okay, this is a great mistake. We have an original Tanzer. We can't keep it. And they loved my dad. So anyway, they asked Broom. So my father taught at Broom at the very end of his life, but the whole end of his life, I'm very bad with numbers and years, maybe last 15 years of his life, he taught art at SUNY Broome, then BCC, for those of us that are our age. And they asked the school if they wanted this painting. And so first it was just, can we donate it? Then the school was, can we do some kind of like more formal reception? Can we do a ceremony? Can we have a whole show? So then they were reaching out to people like my mother, who has a bunch of his work. And so it became a whole show, which is gonna be up for several weeks. And then it was like, can you all come in? Then it was, Ben, can you speak? And then it was, hey, let's bring everybody. So I got my wife Debbie and the boys, Miles and Noah. And then my cousin came in from California because she was on her way to the East Coast anyway. And it became a whole thing. And people from high school were zipping in and out, and college. And of course, people who loved my dad and were students of his. And it was really wonderful. One of the tricky things, I think, being the son of an artist, tricky for me anyway, is that, anyone wants their parents to have some kind of legacy. I don't know if everybody cares about that, like every parent or every adult. My dad definitely cared about it. So particularly for my mom and I, any opportunity for someone to show interest in his work, we get really pumped up, And the people who knew his work really loved him and admired him. And, I think I sometimes forget how talented he was. And you get to the shows and you're like, wow, 'cause this is the third show that someone has held, including one in this very building 8 years ago, which was tremendous, that we've gone to. And then you see the work. When I was a kid, he and I were very close. But now I realize how little I appreciated it. Like, I knew he was doing it. I barely paid attention. Friends of mine, like Anthony, Tony Brunelli, whose house we're in, gallery we're in, they learned from him. And I was more like, okay, are we making dinner? Like, what's the story?
It's your dad.
Yeah, it's my dad. So I never thought a lot about it, and now it's really exciting. I wish he was there. I always make the joke, but it's a real joke. I think each time there's been an opening, someone's asked me to speak. And I always say, he'd much rather be here. Like when people are like, oh, he must be so excited. And I'm like, he may be excited now wherever he is, but I can guarantee you he'd rather be here. He'd rather have the attention on him. He loved it. So, yeah, we were here for that. The painting's beautiful. It's of the river. He loved painting the river. It's so funny. He's a guy from New York City, loved painting the river, loved the bridges here. He's a real Binghamton. He became like a real Binghamton guy who was still like a real New York guy.
Yeah, no, and I recall that painting, very vividly from last night. And I was actually wondering the time period that that came from. Do you know when that would have been?
It's funny because I think the work, and again, I'm the least art expert in this universe, but the work I think is probably from the 1970s, possibly the 80s. I would be shocked if it was after that. So somewhere in the 70s or 80s. Like the 70s to me has a very distinct look, and it's my favorite era of his work, if there's such a thing. I don't know, it feels like it's probably from then, except that it's a little brighter than that era. The 80s I think got a little brighter, so let's say probably the early 80s. But I think, and my mom isn't here, most of us who know him and know his work, none of us knew where it came from. Like I honestly never saw it before. So he had a studio down here just around the corner, had a bunch of studios. The one longest running one, for those who grew up here, is above the Endicott Johnson shoe store. It's a huge space. And so he worked out of that space for years, and he would paint at home. So even though I'm going to slightly contradict myself, even though I wasn't totally paying attention, I can practically identify almost every painting from the time period. This one, I think we all agree we have, and it's, as I said, it's enormous. So yeah. It's really a mystery. And maybe that means I was already out of the house. Maybe that means it's got to be the late 80s. It didn't seem like that, but I'm going to say late 80s. We'll go with that because none of us recognize it.
Yeah, and I think, it really, to me, resembles the definition of a true artist, where he loved his work so much that he wouldn't even brag about it or bring the family to even see it. He would just do his work and then move on to the next one.
Yeah, he's a tricky, very interesting. I have two very interesting parents. I was make sure I get my mom in the conversation, but yeah, very interesting guy. Like really very humble in a way, but also just like a huge ego. not a huge ego you'd ever see, but ego in that way that he did want to be recognized. Maybe that's not ego, maybe that's something else. But, very humble, not a braggy guy at all, but he did want it. He really wanted it, and he really hustled, and if we come back to this, I have always been drawn to hustlers. I mean, in the positive light, the people who are like you, I sort of have known you as kids. We knew each other, but now I've been watching you on social media and everything you're doing, and I'm like, that's a guy I want to talk to. And then you called me up, and I thought I'll just treat that as kismet. But people are trying to make stuff out of nothing, and I mean, he came from nothing, came from this really poor family, went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a kid, and it blew his mind. It's all more complicated, but he hustled and he wanted it. He didn't just hustle with the idea that I'm doing something I love. He wanted it. He wanted people to recognize him. He wanted his work out there. Once in a while, he'd say something like, it's amazing people buy these paintings, but man, if I could get them in a museum, that's the goal. That's the goal. So,
well, it was fascinating work, and my wife and I were so happy to be there last night.
I really appreciate you coming by. It was very cool.
Absolutely. So look, you just mentioned we recently reconnected. We knew each other back in high school, and you went through our American Real 21-Day Challenge.
I did. Poorly, I think. Well, I loved it, but I did it poorly.
You did it. You're a graduate. And could you just touch on the experience? Tell us what it was like for you.
Absolutely. So, it's really funny, and I think I was sharing this on the videos. I was trying to be as real time as possible. I didn't think I'd have any issues being able to just fire up and talk for 60 seconds. I know that seems like it concerns some people. That I was never worried about. What was interesting was I also don't think I was worried about how easy it would be just to record every day. And I think through the first 2 weeks I was blazing, super, not at the same time every day, but then I got sick, and then the family was traveling, and I ran into some deadlines. The first 2 weeks everything was I was going about my business. And as soon as things got disrupted, even in a positive way, in my personal life and work life, all of a sudden I missed a day. I think you were very generous, said, it's okay, just pick back up. It was actually surprisingly hard, and it really, and I was super focused on finishing, which I always am. But what was interesting was, it was a reminder, you and I talked about this, it's very easy to get disrupted.
Yeah.
And what you and I talked about, which is something I've always valued as a writer, maybe less so as a worker, so I'll have to think about that even the smallest interruptions can really get you off your game, even if they're positive interruptions. And I don't think I always understood that. That's something that's sort of coming to me with age. Now there's a lot of research studying around that, so I've been reading about it. But it was funny. I got disrupted. It was very hard. I had a flight where I was delayed, so I recorded in the airport because I was worried. I didn't know when I was going to land. And then that was one of the things. And then I had to go back home and then catch the flight the next day. And then when I was home the next day, all these deadlines were hitting. And then I remember I missed 2 days in a row or 3 days, and I thought, really hard to do this. Really hard to slow down and both get in and out of your head. So, I loved it, and I hope it was helpful and interesting. It was to me, but harder than I expected. Yeah. I was really thrown by that.
And for people that don't know, the 21-Day Challenge is you record a live video of yourself for 60 seconds for 21 straight days. And, as you're talking, to me, Ben, the challenge itself represents life. Things get in the way of life. Things happen unexpectedly. And through that 21-day period, it's almost inevitable that it happens with every single person, where at some point they hit this dip where either they never come out of it, or it takes them a few days to come out of it. But when they do come out of it, they're even more enthused with what they're doing. And I just would love to know, is there anything you learned from it personally going through that 21-day cycle about yourself? Yeah,
it's interesting. Well, I talk a lot, especially in my work, about narrative, personal narrative. And one thing I learned, and it's funny, you probably know this work you do, people listening to this, there's certain stuff you preach or talk about, and hopefully you live it. One of the things I do is teach a class about finding work, but it's really about finding your story and differentiating yourself. That's always my goal for my students. Differentiate yourself. Understand why you're unique. Have the best tools available. You're not walking out of my class, and again, this isn't even stuff I'm all great at. You're not going to walk out of class and not have a story. You're not going to walk out of class and not be able to present. You're not going to walk out of class and not have a really tight resume and cover letter writing skills, and your LinkedIn's going to be popping. Like, those are things I try to balance, you know. But consistency is a thing, and I think part of understanding your story and telling your story is that you're paying attention to it. And I share that. I mean, I know that, but it was funny. Being disrupted, allowing myself to get disrupted during the 21 days also threw me off. Like, I was consciously trying to craft a kind of narrative for that 21 days, like what it's like to be in the moment and not prepare and build something like, hey, today I'm joking about my hair, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to give that a call back, right? Like, if you were to watch the 21 days, you'd say, oh, he was really up to something. Like, he was consciously thinking about what the 21 days he was using it for. And what I was struck by is that because of that inconsistency, in losing my momentum, I couldn't keep up with my own story. And that's why I think people get stuck on that in real life, They get stuck in when the flow, let's use that word, when the flow is disrupted, then it's hard to step back into the flow. I don't think before the 21 days I ever thought of myself as someone who couldn't step in and out of something. And it's a good reminder that it's very hard. It has to be conscious. It has to be practiced. And that was an interesting lesson. Like, I'm getting a lot of lessons, and I have rearranged my work life in the last 6 months. Like, I've rearranged a lot of things in my life recently anyway, so the timing of meeting up with you is interesting. But it was a good microcosm for got to stay on it, got to be conscious, Again, things I talk about, things I try to live and have always tried to live, but that was a good reminder that it's hard to do that, and then you don't remember where you were the day before.
Right.
Never bothered me when I was like a full-time worker guy and just going. Now that I'm not going in the same way and trying to slow down and trying to be conscious of everything, much harder. In a way, it's harder to do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your writing, your storytelling,
I'd be thrilled.
Communication. You were all about these things. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, and I love words, so there's a way to talk about it just like that. But I was always a voracious reader, and I don't think I ever thought of myself as someone who'd be a writer, or even look at that as a tool. I mean, I think it starts with reading, and it's funny. There's very few authors or people who teach writing. I'm an author. I'm not someone who teaches writing. I mean, I do if people want me to, but they'll always say it starts with reading. And the first thing I think I was able to do well, or even just able to do, my earliest memory of learning something was how to read, which I should give a shout out to MacArthur School on the South Side, where I went to elementary school. I don't know what they were doing or not doing, but reading clicked for me very young. And so I think it starts with books. Always loved books. And I've made this joke before, but it's true, and it ties all the stuff together. Some of the stuff together we'll talk about. I was always fascinated with authors, and not authors' lives per se, or how do they go about their craft. So I'm actually not someone who's super interested in craft, but I was interested in their role in the world, how that happens. And so I know it's awesome to meet athletes. I like to do that, and politicians and other celebrities and actors and actresses. Though I've not done a lot of that, I've always been like, I'd love to meet a writer. I always wanted to meet writers. And so I say that because there's something about that crafting of language. There's a very famous. He's famous in writing circles. He died in Binghamton, I believe. A guy named John Gardner. I'll meet people every once in a while, authors, and certainly academics, of which I'm not, and they'll know him. And he taught at SUNY Binghamton. It would have been Harper back then. It was probably like the 70s. He was like a renegade guy, beautiful writer, a craftsperson. I think he died in a motorcycle accident, sort of like a bad boy. I don't know. But of course, my dad knew him. Somehow they were connected. And my dad got me his book. One of his books on how to write. I carried it around for years, never read it. I must have carried it from city to city, country to country. I finally read it just after my dad died, like as an homage. And I had really just started writing when my dad passed away. And so I share all that because I've always been caught up in words. And the fact that my dad had met John Gardner maybe once somewhere in downtown Binghamton, I was like, wow, so writers are real. It's like a real thing. I know it sounds ridiculous. If my mother was here, she'd be like, well, of course it's real things. You were the son of an artist. But I say all that because it never occurred to me to write when I was younger, but I wanted to be somehow in that universe, even if it was just reading books and meeting authors. And, again, it's so funny because we went to the same high school. When I was a senior, I don't think I did this by choice, I should add, I took what I believe was a required creative writing class. And I didn't do any, I should say, this is embarrassing, especially when my kids are watching. I really didn't start doing work until I got to college. So I was just doing what you needed to do. But that class had an impact on me. And I wrote a couple of things that got some attention. So when I look back now, I realize that a couple of things, I got a very visceral response. And something got stuck in my head that maybe you can write. And when I left for college, I sort of had that in my head, but then I set it aside for years. I mean, years and years. But I came back to it. That's a whole other story if you're interested. But something connected. First it was books, then it was this creative writing class. I want to give a shout out to Miss Cost. I don't know if she still teaches here. I love her. I loved her then. She was so interesting and really made me want to write. She did. And but I didn't for years and years. Didn't get started until much later, but I was always caught up in words. And so it really does start with that. And I found it very difficult. Like that class worked for me, but I could never get untracked. And I didn't until about age 30. And that's when things really started for me.
So tell us about that. So what did it come back to?
So you'll like this. This is one of those like aha moments. And I hope it only sounds positive in relation to my family and other things. But I was very focused. When I got to college, I was very focused on doing well. So I had only done okay here at Binghamton High School, which is only on me. It's not on my parents, certainly. It's not on the teachers. Like it was a good high school, and there were lots of teachers. I could name them that I really liked, that inspired me. Miss Lord, who was one of our English teachers. Mr. Giovanni. I guess I do have a thing for English teachers, but I loved that school. And I loved West Junior too. Like I feel like I got a really great education, but I really didn't try after 8th grade very hard. And I don't know if you know, because I don't know, you were younger, but when I was in 9th grade, I broke my leg up at Greek Peak, and I missed half the school year.
Wow.
So, I was only about 14, and they decided to put me in traction. And so I spent January till almost April lying in a hospital bed in 9th grade. And I don't think I didn't recover from that academically. I don't think I tried after that. I didn't do any schoolwork the whole time, and I never caught up. And I don't think I ever really caught up. So I was very focused in college, like have to do well. And I said to myself, if I do well the first semester, then I'm going to try really hard. And if I don't do well, I'm not going to try. Like maybe I'm not capable. And then I did really well. And then I thought, it's on now. So college went well, and I was very academically focused. And I share that because I wasn't intellectually focused. It was, how do you get a good grade? What does that look like? What's the formula? And I really pushed from day one, like all the way through. I mean, I saw a friend of mine from college last weekend. I probably was in the library 4 or 5 hours a day, every day for 4 years. And that's not bragging, it's just funny. Like I did the math. You only have to go to class 6 hours a day. You sleep 8 hours a day, which I never did. And I started breaking it down. I thought I could literally do everything I want, and you'll still have hours left over. And I worked all through college also. And as soon as I realized you could study, it blew my mind. So every day, just every day. And I share all that because I didn't explore this other stuff. And I got out of school. I moved to California. I worked out there. It was great. We played Ultimate Frisbee back then, which always sounds funny to me now, but I was really into that. Got to compete at the Nationals one time. Moved to New York City, became a social worker, early 90s in New York. It was amazing. We were there for a couple of years. The work was hard, but really, I don't know, it really changed me. It changed me that it gave me more focus. I was like, okay, social justice, social work, working with families, working with children and parents. Like I just got like really excited about it. And I'd always wanted to go to grad school, and I had wanted to go somewhere that felt old, like almost like fancy, to use one of my kids' words. So I fixated on University of Chicago, and I thought, if they will let me in, I want to walk those ivory halls, whatever it is. So I got in there. My wife was like, we're not going to stay in New York City. I'm like, please move with me. And so we moved to Chicago. And I share all this because I was figuring it out slowly, but never really in an organized fashion, and living a very interesting, exciting, I thought, interesting life, interesting work, interesting people, big cities. So we moved to Chicago, finished the program, got a great job, and then got married to my now wife of 20-something years. And this is the build-up, sorry, bro. But I was starting to think about writing all the time. So at that point, I had been thinking about, something had clicked after college, and I said, you gotta write. And I couldn't get started, and I was journaling like crazy, and half the time I'd be like, why aren't you writing? Fast forward to 30, I'm out of graduate school for about a year, I'm married about a year, and I wake up one morning, And I'm like, wow, work is pretty awesome. Like I pulled something off. Like I had an idea and I chased it, and now I'm doing the kind of work. And I really did for 20 years, the kind of stuff I thought I could do. Ideally impact people's lives and impact lots of people, right? I always had this idea about how do you impact the most people at once. So that was happening, and Debbie, my wife, who I love, that was great. And I woke up one morning, I don't know if I told you this story before, and I thought, not happy. Like I'm not happy. And not unhappy with work or Debbie, like I could see it. I loved both of the things I was doing. I thought there's something missing, like a third leg, almost like a stool, you know? Sure. Balance or whatever it is. I didn't have any of that language then. And I woke up and I thought, you have to start writing. Like that's the missing thing. And so arguably, possibly within 24 hours of that wake up, Debbie gets a call from a friend of ours, a person we know, and they say they're leaving their spouse. That's only important because I had an idea for a short story about someone leaving their spouse. Always had it like in my head, almost like teed up. And this person called, and Debbie was talking to her, and I wasn't involved at all. And then Debbie sort of shared that in a rush of stuff, like lots of words, and we're both super talky, as you can tell. And then she just goes right to sleep. But I'm spinning like crazy. Like I'm spinning on this, whatever it was. And I thought, should I go for a run? You know, so I ran in high school, and I still run 4 or 5 times a week, and I still like to run late at night. I do that less. But still, I'll still go out at 10 or 11 o'clock, even in Chicago. And I thought maybe I should go for a run. I thought, no. And I was like running through all the stuff in my head, and I thought, why don't you just write this? Like, I don't know what clicked. So I wrote that story in one shot.
Wow.
The story I had in my head about this guy leaving his wife. And now, this is a little exaggerated, I've probably been writing every day for 20 years. Couldn't get going for 20 years or 10 years.
And then it just clicked.
And then it clicked. And ever since then, it honestly has transformed everything that followed. So, I mean, I didn't get published for years, for those of you listening. I don't think I got anything published for almost 7 years. I mean, I was like writing in the dark, and some things were popping up now and again. Certainly for 2 or 3 years, couldn't even get oh yeah, we'll consider that. I mean, the stack of rejection letters I have saved is awesome. And then back then, people sent you actual rejection letters. Sure. And I saved them for motivation. And I'm not even someone who seeks motivation. I just thought, just remember how bad this feels.
Yeah.
But also exciting. Someone would write you a personal note, and they'd say, we don't want this, but there's promise. And you know, I'd never taken a writing class. I didn't go to writing programs. The only class I ever really took was that one in high school. So I shared all that because I got going, right? I got writing, and then I started getting published. And then 2007, so the last 10 years, everything has really blown up for me. 2007, my first novel came out, which always sounds obnoxious. I apologize. But that publisher, this is really important, well, to me, not to the universe, but that publisher said, you need to understand, our marketing means are limited. You either help us or your book's only gonna get X amount of attention. And I didn't understand publishing at all because like a lot of things, didn't study it, didn't understand it, had only just started meeting writers, and that's a whole other story. But he said, I need you to figure this out with us if you want. He goes, if not, it'll be a beautiful book. You'll know I love it. We'll see what happens. And I said, what does that look like? Like, what do you mean? I never had thought about marketing, nothing. He said, you could start a blog, which people were just, you got a picture, 2007, right. That was still a new thing.
Yes.
And authors barely did it. And I had been fascinated by it because I read constantly. And so I was really reading about social media. And I said, okay, I'll start blogging. So I probably started blogging the next day. And that opened up this whole world because I thought, this is a tool. And then I thought, what's this MySpace thing? Can authors use that? And then Facebook came along, and I was a very early, I know it feels more controversial these days, but I was a very early adopter. I always saw Facebook as a communications tool. The fact that everybody's on it now, that wasn't the case then. It was like college kids. I remember my wife was like, what are you doing? She goes, Facebook? Like, it was a joke in that way. And I said, and again, I'm not prescient. I said, this is going to be not big like an investor would say. I don't have that kind of insight. I just said, this is going to be something people like me can use. I was convinced of it. So I just started using Facebook, and then Twitter came along. I thought Twitter, and then I started seeing all these things hang together. If you're smart, you'll do a blog, you'll tweet about it, you'll put it on Facebook, and you'll cross-promote. That was part one. Part two, I thought, was it's really obnoxious just to cross-promote yourself. And here I've spent my whole life loving authors and independent voices, and I'm going to tie the whole thing together. And people like my dad, who couldn't really totally find their way, though he was a beautiful artist and I've always thought wildly successful. I thought, what if I started giving voices to people I love? No one reads as much as I read. So I started blogging about other writers and I started blogging about their books. And then I thought, which will tie this together, well, what's this whole podcast nonsense? So I'm also an early adopter, though I remain too unrefined. I started podcasting almost 10 years ago, just interviewing people, looking for authors, and I started seeing how it all hangs together. And then when I started making it all hang together, I started thinking, couldn't I bring this to work? So then the communications position opened up on that long-time job you mentioned, and I said to the boss, we could be using Facebook. I'm telling you, people rejected it. I would like to say I got the last laugh on that. But I said, we could blog, and my boss is like, take care of the stuff I want you to take care of, and if all that other stuff works, fine. And so I did the traditional stuff, which I actually didn't know very much about, and would still argue not my strength, but I did the stuff he needed, the grant writing, the proselytizing about the issue, public speaking, writing grants, and then I started bringing stuff in, blogging and Facebook and all this. And again, I don't want to take credit. I just want to say that because I started writing and because I already loved words, and at the time on that job I was basically unsupervised, I got to start playing with language. And then I realized, here I'd spent my whole life loving authors, loving words, loving writers. Now words have so much, this is not an original thought, but that words really matter. And when you do work like I used to do, like child abuse prevention work, the words are incredible. The work is the work. Nothing's more important than getting the work right. But someone has to talk about it. Someone has to put a frame on it. Someone has to say, there are larger cultural forces that we need to understand, but that they're also backed up by data, right? We did a series of, I thought, beautiful things. It sounds so contradictory. We wrote a lot about the Penn State scandal. I hate using the word scandal because it's worse than that. But, we wanted to make sense of that. That's a systemic failure. And again, some people do not want to hear anything negative about that. But I remember we tried to be so thoughtful about it. What's the best way to talk about this? What does this story mean in relation to healthy child development? And so this is all this language. And I got really revved up. And all of a sudden, I was a communications guy. And it's funny because a lot of stuff people do well, I don't. And then there's other stuff that I do really well. So in this later phase of my life, been trying to understand how that hangs together. How do you take the stuff you're really good at? It turned out I'm really good at branding. I didn't even know branding was a thing. But then branding is also sort of a new concept. But it's still not a new concept, but the people who put language on it. But all that stuff people talk about, we were trying to do for years around that issue. How do you talk about it in a way that has an impact? How do you present an organization as a thought leader? That's a much longer answer than you wanted, but writing opened that door, and it made me realize there was a whole array of things I'd never spent any time on.
Wow.
And didn't know there were even things to do.
So tie all this together for us with your own personal brand. Mm-hmm. When you think about building your own brand, have you been successful doing that?
That's a great question. It's probably like a both and. Can I do the both and? I've been successful in two ways. I think because I was willing and able and interested in putting myself out there, I brought more attention to my books that I might not have. Because I would say none of them have sold that well, which my kids love to jab me on that. And I'm cool with that. That doesn't bother me. Success is always more fun than lack of success, but you also have to define success. But I was able to take, books that might not have gotten much traction, and I created that traction. I will also say, though, and I mean this earnestly, as soon as I created a set of platforms, people came to them. It took time, so maybe 5 years after I started blogging, I started getting calls from authors. Hey man, I read that review about that book. It's not even a review, it's me blogging. I don't even pretend it's formal, but I take it very seriously and I take the language seriously. And I read that review you wrote about so-and-so's book. That's one of my favorite books. Would you be willing to read my book? And so then people started pitching me. And then the podcast got out there. This podcast will change your life. And then people started saying, I listened to that interview you did with so-and-so, would you do one with me? So first it was just other random authors, and that really excited me. And I should say, I always had a goal, I've created this whole mini cultural thing, this blog will change your life. So blogging, it's a podcast, I write about books, I have a zine, so I try to get authors out there who are underrepresented voice-wise, or they're just not popular. But I always saw it all hanging together, because for me, what I wanted my brand to be was, he will shamelessly self-promote his work, and I do, and I'm completely comfortable. And when other authors tell me they're uncomfortable, or anyone, not just authors, I'm like, let go of that. You have a goal in mind. And I always say this, and it's funny because someone wrote an article that got a ton of attention in the writer universe, and he used a line that I use all the time. Not that he took it from me, but it was funny to see it because I've said this in a million workshops. No one's going to love your book as much as you do. And I would say no one's going to love your podcast. Even if your podcast gets enormously successful, which it will, which it already is, still no one's going to care as much as Roger Brooks. And that's always been a thought of mine. And so I shamelessly self-promote, but I also shamelessly promote anyone I love. And so if you've got a book out there, you've got a movie, you're doing anything creative, you've got an Indiegogo campaign or Kickstarter, I'm going to make some donation, usually small, I want to apologize, but I will be happy to hype it, and I will be happy to use all of my stuff to get it out there. And so, half of my brand, which has been successful, is, I think, if you ever find me, Ben Tanzer's an author who takes care of himself, but is happy to take care of everybody. And I've really tried to do that. I think the second part of the brand, which is more recent, is Ben Tanzer. I'm talking in third person. Apologies, that's so embarrassing. It's like a Seinfeld episode. Ben Tanzer is someone who really studied this stuff, though primarily just followed his gut instinct, and now sees there's a way to formally offer that to other people. You have a book you want to write? I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to get books out in the world. I can't guarantee you'll get it published, but I can help you write a great book. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. You have a small business and you're not super sophisticated. You're really good at what you do, but you want to think about voice and message. Well, good. I worked with a multi-million-dollar nonprofit. We spent years trying to figure that out. I can be of help to you. You need a coach, So I think there's a brand emerging that I can be a go-to person, especially at the beginning of something, when you've got a million thoughts in your head, whoever you are, and you're hoping I'll help you sort of organize it and peel back the layer. So that's a new thing. They're connected, though. To me, it's on a continuum. And, it's funny because I'm involved with a lot of spiritual people who I love. And, I'm not really like that. I mean, I just wasn't raised that way. I don't think that way, but I see, to me, things are always connected. They're all connected. I mean, you finding me, we have a connection that maybe wasn't even a connection. It was something. We grew up together in a way. Like, to me, now we've been best friends for 30 years. I don't know, right? So it's all connected. And so I see the work stuff is all connected. And there's stops and starts. We don't need to get into, we get into anything. I like to be as transparent as possible. Like, I've had a very bad year and a half work-wise. Last couple of years have not been good. After my longtime job, I really was having problems getting my footing. And it was embarrassing and very humbling, which is a word I rarely use because I try to keep it all as neutral, not neutral, what's the word? As calm as possible, and really been stumbling after that long-time job ended. And I decided I was just gonna have to recreate myself. Like, I tried to recreate the version I was, that we had a kind of success, and I couldn't figure it out at other places. And so I thought, I'm gonna have to come up with a new version. So last, say, 6 months, I've stripped everything down, left full-time work, left the safety of an office, which I always really wanted and liked, left the safety of having, health insurance somebody was providing, left the safety of my, of having retirement. So all of it I'm trying to refigure out. And that, I think, is now going to be part of the brand too.
And I think there's a lot of people out there, and I'm sure many that are listening, that have the same idea, that they would love to be able to do what you did. What gave you the encouragement to actually take that leap?
So it's funny, I was at a lunch thing, because now I've always was a huge networker and connector. I had a friend once say, dude, networking is a dead word. Stop using it. This guy is much cooler than me. But it was funny the way he phrased it, because I had him come speak in my class. He said, I know Professor Tanzer wants you to network. He's like, I'm not having it. You're going to connect. That's cool. So I'm doing a lot of connecting. So I was at something, and some guy said to me, how's it going so far? I said, I don't know. It feels good. I'm happy. I'm getting clients. We're doing cool things. That was always the goal. I'm being helpful, I hope. And then he said, what do you think the impetus was? And I paused. He goes, I'll tell you what it was really funny. He was just setting me up. He said, things weren't working in your life. He goes, it'd be great to make a leap when things are going well. He goes, I'm guessing most people in this room made a leap because things weren't going well. So that's an interesting thing. I've never operated, that almost feels like a scarcity mindset, like, wow, everything's so negative. I have to say, I have definitely been like in a mid-work crisis. It was funny, my older son was like, are you leaving the family? Like when I quit my job, when I left my job, I shouldn't say quit. When I left, it was mutual and probably gonna be worse. But he said, are you having a midlife crisis? Are you leaving the family? And he was joking, but he's 16, so everything to him is dramatic and funny. I said, no, man, it's a mid-work crisis. I love you guys. I love this house. I love our life. I said, I'm just not, I've been unable to figure things out lately. I need to do a different thing. And he's like, whatever. That was boring to him. He's trying to make sure I wasn't moving out or something. But I share that because I wanted to do this sooner, and I couldn't see it. And I think feeling a little more desperate, I just made myself visualize it. I don't think it's the way to do things. I mean, to me, the fantasy, and if you and I were sitting down over coffee, you're like, Ben, things are going really well, but I need to do something different. I would give you the advice I gave myself. I just know I came from a deficit spot. Like, I was struggling. I was really struggling. So what was the impetus? I had been planning it in my head for years. I had buffed up my LinkedIn page. I had always supported other people and always made friends and always tried to be reliable. I had tried to do tons of volunteer stuff. So I had a million side hustles. Some things I got paid for, some didn't. And a lot of that's just living a full life. Like, my goal, at some point something clicked. It wasn't in high school for sure. It wasn't in college for sure. It wasn't even right out of college. But somewhere in the last 20 years, I thought, consciously live the fullest life you can live. Be conscious. And I was, in a way, already doing that. Old friends of mine will say, you were already doing that, maybe doing that better than anyone else. But I wasn't doing it like in a conscious fashion. I just always thought, if that's cool, I'm going to pursue it. So consciously, I started shifting. And now lately, I started thinking, how do you do that? Can you turn something into something? And timing is a very interesting thing. I first thought about this a year ago when I was feeling less desperate and I was feeling less fraught. And I wasn't sort of waking up in a panic, which is a new thing to me too. And then it wasn't working. Like, I couldn't figure it out. So there is a kind, at least for someone like me, which I think is unfortunate, the impetus partially was like, dude, if you don't figure this out, you're going to be 50 years old and you've done so well. That sounds obnoxious too, but you've done so well and now you're not doing well. Like, you're going to have to figure this out. And so I tried to recreate myself. So the impetus was really, I already had the idea. I couldn't totally visualize it. And then the struggle, I thought with the struggle, I'm going to have to take a chance. And so I just jumped. That's the other thing. There's that whole cliche thing, though it applies to Raiders of the Lost Ark and Michael Jordan. Leap and the net will appear. I've always believed that, never trusted it. It seemed too impossible because to me that's fantasy. And even though I grew up reading fantasy novels and love fantasy movies, and I actually engage in fantasy all the time. I mean, I'm an author. I thought that's not real. So far it's going okay. I wouldn't overhype it or underhype it, but a little bit desperation for sure.
And how do you feel now that you did it?
Oh my gosh. Can I tell you a good story? I'm a storyteller. So my 12-year-old, well, I love both my children to death, but my 12-year-old said, so he's a really sensitive, thoughtful guy. I mean, I could burst into tears, think about him. He's like, so do you still work like you used to? And I said, what does that mean? Because I was at the kitchen table. I'm always at the kitchen table now. And he's like, I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, like, do you go to an office? And I said, no, rarely. He goes, do you have clients? He goes, and he could say it like it was a new word to him. I go, I do. He goes, do you go to their offices? I go, yes, sometimes. He goes, does it look like your old job? I said, no, I don't have a desk there. I don't have an office. And he said, okay, but you have clients. You're working. And he wasn't saying it because he was worried, unlike, say, my 16-year-old. I said, yeah, no, I'm working. He goes, how's it going? I said, I think it's going okay. And he paused. He goes, good. You seem really happy.
Wow.
And I thought, did I not seem happy? I guess I didn't. Or maybe I seemed fine, but now I'm smiling. I don't know. So how's it going? It makes me really happy, And it's funny, still have the same kind of dread on Mondays you have whether you go into an office like, oh my God, I let it go over the weekend. Or I worked all weekend, but it wasn't enough. Or there are deadlines. So it's still work, But
do you feel a weight has been lifted in some respect?
I'll say, I feel a weight has been lifted in terms of feeling confused and uncertain. Yes, for sure. Like, I was weighed down by my inability to recreate the work I was doing. So yeah, no, it's an incredible weight. Now I have the pressure of, will people pay? Will I actually find clients? Is the insurance going to work? Now I have to worry about stuff that I, in a way, didn't, which is a terrible thing to say because lots of people don't have insurance and lots of people don't have steady paychecks. And, I feel that, but I really didn't worry about that for 20, 25 years. I never made a lot of money, but had steady paychecks for 20 years. Health insurance, stuff that I do not take for granted. Now I don't have any of that by choice. Not totally by choice. If I had figured something else out a year or two ago, we might be having a different conversation. I hope we'd be having one, but things didn't work. So that's a different kind of weight. But as far as waking up and being like, I'm going to kick butt today, I do feel like that every day now.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You talked about creativity. What is it about creativity that gives you so much drive? Why do you want to create? Why do so many people love to create?
You know, I think there's a somewhat unknowable part to that. It's not a deflection, meaning people are born with different talents. So I've never understood that. There is a sort of nature versus nurture. There is a nature part, right? People are born to do different things. Like I know one of your recent guests was King Rice. You know, I don't know him. I knew him in high school, but clearly among many other things, and I don't know, you know, I said to you, we all idolize him, and it's a great feeling, actually. You know, you put a ball in his hands. I don't know if the first time he picked up a basketball, he was like, I can do this. I don't know, probably. I'm guessing probably on some level. You know, I think creativity is a bit like that. And I think on the basketball court, he was creative. I actually talk about creativity, like I treat it as a very wide subject. I think we're creative when we have a gift. So the first question is, do you understand your gift? And is it a gift you want? I mean, teaching can be very creative. You know, here we're talking about my father earlier. You know, he was a beautiful painter. But part of his legacy is that as a teacher, he was lionized. Is that the right word? Yeah. So that was not his favorite part of his legacy. You know, he wants to be known as an artist. But the fact is, you meet a student of his, and they're like, he changed my life. You know, that I have heard for 30 years. Yeah. And so I say that because creativity is a big thing. So for me, once I started writing, you know, to finish something, to see those words come to life, this always sounds funny, to make like the right edit where you're like, where I'm stuck on something and I know there's a story there and I'm trying to mold something, and every writer out there, maybe every person's gonna understand this feeling, and then all you do is cut out a sentence that was in the way, and the story just pops. I mean, I love that feeling. And other writers may hate this, so I've had this discussion. Like, I don't suffer from writer's block, so whether one thinks I'm a good writer or not, that's a whole separate debate, and whether I'm not doing the work hard enough, like I love all those conversations, but I can sit down anytime, day or night, and pick up where I left off yesterday and write, you know, and so that's a gift. That's a different kind of gift. Now, it's also 30 years of wanting it and now desperately wanting to do it, but I share that because, you know, the best part of it is writing something start to finish, whether it's a short story or an essay or a whole book, and then coming back and unpacking it and saying, okay, there's a thread here. You didn't connect chapter 2 to chapter 8, or that was an awesome idea, beautiful job, dude, that's a great scene, kill it. Like, it actually doesn't fit. You know, you meaning me, you love the feeling of it, but it belongs somewhere else. And I don't know if everybody feels that way. I love that process. To me, the most creative part of it, and the part I love most, is then going over it with my process, except for like a novel maybe, is I write everything freehand. Oh. Then I type it all up, and then I print it, and then I sit there for however long it takes, and I go word by word, and I go, is that the right word? Is that the right sentence? Did I mean that? I once used the word scrum in a novel, and I was thinking of like a rugby scrum, because I was trying to create a feeling of chaos. And then this is a book that got the most attention from a publisher, and the editor wrote me back and said, is that supposed to be scrum? She had never heard of the word. And I wrote back and I said, you should tell me if people will get stuck on it. If you don't think it's a word people know, I don't need to own that word. This is an entire novel. I can kill a word. I said, but here's what I was trying to get to. And then she wrote back and she went, oh, I've just never heard of it. She was, okay, we'll keep it in. But it was really funny. That word seemed perfect. And then I thought, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
So that part I love. You know, I had a book come out a couple years ago, Lost in Space.
Yes.
And I loved it. And I have to say, this is another thing that makes me terrible. I love all my books. Like, people are like, which is your favorite? Or is there a bad one? I'm like, no.
How many have you written? 7?
God, 7 books, I think. Yeah, maybe 5 novels, 2 essay collections, and a short story collection. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, this Lost in Space, I had you always get different editors. And this woman, who I really like, and is an awesome editor, she was even more hands-on than I'm accustomed to. And I've had all kinds. And when I first got her notes, which were primarily positive, but she was literally like, you think that sentence belongs here or here? Like, maybe it's just better in the next paragraph. Not everybody wants to do that.
Right.
I do that when I help people with their books. And for a second, it was overwhelming. Like, it was 200 pages that I had written, and then notes on every page. Then I caught my breath, I put it aside, caught my breath, looked back at it, And I thought, because I know what my own notes look like. It's funny to see someone else's notes. And I thought, take it in. This is a new experience. And it was absolutely stimulating. So when you say what stimulates about creativity, it's having a story or an idea, it's carving out an idea, and then it's making those little tweaks. Or, I don't really outline. Sometimes I do. But maybe it's having like a free association. So I'm working on a story, and I'm thinking of Thirsties, for those of you who grew up here. So Thirsties is like almost always my bar. So I did a whole collection of short stories called the New York Stories. And it's 30 stories that are loosely modeled on a town like Binghamton. So it's not Binghamton, but it's a town like Binghamton. Because I wanted to write about a smaller town, like where we grew up. And the last section of the book, there's 3 sections. I wanted to have like an event, something. And so then Binghamton got flooded, which I don't think ever happened when we grew up.
Right.
And so the last section is called After the Flood. And every story has some thread that carries from section to section. And the last section, it's all the characters and all of their bars and all of their haunts being affected by a massive flood. Wow. And so it pulls it together. I only share that because, again, it was one of those moments of creativity. I knew I had 10 more stories in my head. I wanted a thread, and then somebody from home sent me a note or on Facebook or a text, and they're like, MacArthur's underwater. That was the first message I got because, I went to MacArthur. I love MacArthur. And they're like, they're going to have to tear it down. And then they go, and have you seen downtown, like by Thirsties? And that whole, and I wasn't living here at the time, like that whole part of the South Side, was apparently like fully underwater. And I got really emotional. First I got really emotional, which I tend to do. And then I got really sad for Binghamton. It sounded terrible. And then I thought, which is the crass part, and the part about being a writer. And as one writer said, every writer has like a sliver of ice in their heart. I think that was Graham Greene. I thought, now I know what those last 10 stories are going to revolve around. All these characters are going to be affected by a flood. And so I only share that because that was one of those pow moments. I had already been sketching out the stories, but I wanted a different thread. And also I thought, that's what's going to happen when he leaves the bar. That's going to happen when he and his wife. So I had written a story about a guy and his wife is sick. But I was able to sort of
tie
hype
it all
up more.
together.
Yeah, the flood tied it together.
And where does that creative unconscious come from?
I would suggest, at least partially, and it's going to tie into it, I'll make a callback to my work life. It's being as engaged in the world as you can be. So I'm a huge consumer of ideas and copy. And I read the newspaper every morning. And what's funny is one of my new things now that I'm working for myself, I allow myself to read the paper start to finish every morning before I start work. Now my kids get up very early for school, so it's still a normal work day, but I try not to run to the kitchen table. I sit on the couch and I pour a big cup of iced coffee and I read that paper start to finish. So I find that stuff to be invaluable. I have very little fat in the day. I try to get out of the house year round. People are like, you're running at 20 below zero? Because that's a Chicago thing. But I've always prided myself on that. And if my friend, a fellow BHS grad, Jeff Coco's out there, we ran year round in Binghamton. It was like a point of pride to us. It wasn't just being in shape and getting ready for the season, of course. And he was a champion. I was not a champion. But the idea that you could run in Binghamton dead of winter, like that was so important to us. And so I've kept that going for 30 years. Wherever I live, whatever the weather, I will run with icicles coming off my hair. And so, but I share that because I feel like you have to be out in the world. And, if you're out in the world, things come to you. I've stayed connected to people in Binghamton because I love it here and because Facebook opened up a door. People love to dog Facebook. And I do think there's a lot of negatives, and certainly with the data, it's obscene. But you can connect with someone you knew in 8th grade. Now, on the one hand, that sounds like a joke. On the other hand, I have found it incredibly fulfilling. And it has opened up my mind further, right? I'm sure I would have heard about the floods in Binghamton, but no, I have no family here anymore. But someone thought it was important that I know. And then I read it voraciously, and that became a thing. So I say to people, you have to read and go to the movies and take walks, leave the house. Like, I never, and this isn't a criticism, by the way, it's just how I've had to live. I'll never let myself get lost like in a marathon of Breaking Bad. That's just off. Like someone might say, oh my God, dude, I lost the whole day watching Breaking Bad. I just don't allow it. I can't allow it. And again, I love to do that. Now, sometimes I will schedule a marathon, but then it's a conscious and today, no one's in the house. I'm giving myself 4 hours of television and a lot of coffee. But I think it's being out there. And so I'm already thinking, and I am writing stuff in my head I cannot shut that off. Sometimes I'm writing massively and it's lots of voices. And a couple of years ago, I knocked out 3 books in an 18-month period. One I finished for someone, one somebody asked me to write, and one I just got caught up in. And near the end of that, every day, something was coming up, and I thought, ooh, that would fit here or here. And then I actually made myself take off 3 months because I was worried that I couldn't calm the voices in my head. So I finished each project, and I didn't think it was negative, like it wasn't affecting work or my marriage. It wasn't affecting anything. I just thought, it doesn't seem totally healthy to have this much pinging going on. So I made myself take a break and calm the voices, and I started again. So when I said I've written every day for 30, 20 years, there are exceptions. That was a very conscious, like, let's get a little, I didn't feel calm enough, but I also knocked out 3 books I'm really proud of. So where did that creativity come from? I think you flip a switch, right? Like you've done. I mean, I'm projecting onto you. You saw something about American Real. There's my memory of you and I talking about it. It appealed to something in you. Again, you're a hustler, you're interested in talking, you're interested in stories. This gave you a forum. Once you had the forum, the flip was switched, right? Now you're always, I'm guessing, every day you're like, that would be good for the show, that would be good for the business. I could put together a webinar. I could do this 21-day thing. That's what it's like. Mm. And I think you know it. You may not, I mean, you are a writer. That's my understanding. But I'm applying it to American Real. In American Real, you've hit a creative thing, and now you're just trying to figure it out. So that's what I've been doing with writing now. There's always potential for stories. There's always potential for associations. There's always new ideas. I mean, it has honestly changed my life. Not because I've been super successful, not because, I don't know, an author I love called me up and said, dude, that has happened, and it's a gift. I mean, it's a gift. But it's changed my life because it's made me rethink that everything's possible. Not everything's possible. You can achieve everything, right? Like I am not clearly going to play soccer in the Olympics. That was a goal when I was 14. I completely blew that. But meaning everything's possible to tie into something else. It all hangs, which is where we started this conversation. And I really believe that. And writing has showed me that more than anything.
Why is it important for people to have a voice and for people to be able to tell their own story?
Possibly the thing that's most important to me. I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one, when a person owns their own, not just can tell a story, but owns their story, it gives them more confidence and more opportunity. And you need to own your story also, I'm gonna get a little more clinical maybe, so that you can overcome the things that hold you back. And some of those things are realer than other, right? You may have made a mistake, committed a crime. I'm just thinking about this because I'm involved with this nonprofit. So you may have gotten a situation where you committed a crime. Now you've got to get back out in the world. Things are going to be stacked against you, which is I think is unfortunate. Owning your story and being able to understand how things went as they did allows you then to meet a potential employer or create a business and say, I was in this situation and I want you to understand how that happened, right? That's your story. You have to own it. I think, I'm a big believer in talk therapy. And part of talk therapy, people are always like, oh, therapy, I find it invaluable. I'm also the child of a therapist. But what I think is important is I think we underappreciate that talking out loud to other people allows you to better fit your own pieces together. You don't always solve major problems. You don't always make your life better overnight. But when you can understand where you came from and where you're going and what impacted you and why, so that's one piece, right? I also think, and I really strongly, it's the thing that has the most effect on me day to day. We have a world, we have a society, we have institutions that they're not built for everybody. They weren't built for everybody. And so, and again, this is really my parents' influence, but I've tried to treat it like something like work and creativity. You've got a world that's stacked against a lot of people. It's not built for them. And someone will push back and say, don't put me in that box. I'm not putting you in a box. I'm just saying there's institutional racism, right? Yeah. There is misogyny and homophobia and all these horrible things. And to create opportunities so people can tell their own stories opens up, first off, it opens up the world to that group. And that was a big thing for my father. If you're not going to talk about such and such a group, I'm going to paint them. And then if you ask me about them, I'm going to talk about them. So I think you're trying to create a universe where everybody can tell their story. Because there isn't just one story. There are many stories. And so I'm also interested that anybody has a chance. They may not want it, and that's fine. But you really have to blow up the system, certain systems, I believe. And one way you blow them up is you tell real stories. I was always pro-gay marriage. But I will always say this, I'm only as pro as my gay friends. Like a lot of people say, gay marriage was never the goal. Gay marriage just makes us like straight people. What we want are the freedoms other people have at work, health insurance, etc. But I share that because one of the ways policy changed was people started telling their stories. First, they were fighting it as a policy issue. When it became a story about love and about trying to achieve what everybody deserves, those stories help tilt the tide, And so I'm a real believer in that. And so why do I believe in stories? Because people don't always get a chance to tell them. If we can create opportunities to do that, if we can give people a voice, who knows what's possible? And you get to change the world. I believe that. I really believe that. And changing the world to me for the positive is one of the things I hope everybody feels. I've always said this, it's awesome to change yourself and to be better, or not even better. Better is so pejorative, right? It's awesome to feel better about yourself and be more confident. But if it only extends to like your day-to-day life, then you're not part of the bigger universe. If you can make changes, then bring them out in the world, whatever that means, meeting people where they're at, volunteering, making donations, like whatever your thing is, then maybe you've had a chance to change the course of something. And I think stories allow that to happen in some way. And so I really value them. I really do.
Awesome. So what's next for Ben Tanzer?
You mean besides leaving here and going to the Public Diner, which
5-year, 10-year plan.
I'm not good at this, but I will say, first off, this is the easiest. If I could take what I've been trying to do the last 6 months and make that a 5 to 10 year run, one thing I've realized, and again, if this plays to my strengths and my weaknesses, I need to be able to better articulate what I'm trying to do. That's not just a story, that's putting language to something. So I've been spending a lot of time on that recently, like what would it look like to coach someone with branding? Like I've been making a lot of it up. I feel sorry, clients. But I've been always good at that. That's one of the reasons I was successful. It's a little harder to do it in an organized way. So 5 years, I'd like to be able to say to you, this is what I can offer to the world. Do you want it or not want it? This is how it's shaped. This is how it's structured. This is what it costs. Those are not big goals, but I would love to be able to say, if you want to work with me, I want to work with you. This is what it would look like. This is how we structure it, So I'm trying to do that. That's a big deal. Have other books to write, have 2 going in my head right now and 2 more I'm going to work on next. What I'm really most interested in, these are not big goals. I want to be clear. There's always big stuff I want, but, I want to find a balance where I've created enough self-generated work that I get to write and I get to run and my kids get to go to college if they want to. And somewhere by 70, which I think is a good window, it's another 20-year window, we're winding down. We're living near a beach. Like I actually don't have lofty, I have political things I want to happen. I hope I get to influence, but Ben Tanzer, I would like to create something where there's enough interesting work and cool stuff and that people feel like they're getting something from it, that's enough to support our house along, what my wife and I do together and what she does on her own, that we get to continue this path. The kids, my goals are really about kids thriving, balance in the home, staying healthy. Those seem like really good goals. When people it was funny, one time we met a financial planner. He said, and Debbie and I had never talked about what our plans were, like beyond whatever, getting through the week. And he said, what are your goals? Like, what do you want? And I said, I don't even think I understand the question. And it was really, I'll never forget his face, because he kind of looked at me and he went, well, like people want a second car or they want a summer home. Like my job is to help people figure out how to do that. And I went, wow. I said, okay. I said, I don't aspire apparently to anything anybody else wants. I said, can you help us figure out how to work really hard till 60 and then part-time if we need to the rest of our lives? And he said, wow, yeah, no, that's easier than, that's not, yeah. He goes, that's just financial planning. I said, that's why we're here. And that was maybe 12 years ago, because then the next week we found out we were pregnant with our younger son, and he brought us a plan. I said, does it get messed up if we're having another child? And he's like, okay, you've destroyed all my work. But I don't think and I said that spontaneously, and Debbie looked at me and she said, yeah, that's what I want too. Like we had never talked about it. And so that's still my idea, to do important work and to do always cool things. I have to admit, that's so, my mom always shudders, but it needs to feel cool. I never want to feel average. I never want to feel like it's not important. I never want to feel like I'm doing something that doesn't have an impact on someone's life. And, it's funny. I got hired for a gig I never would have thought I would have ever gotten. I'm just wrapping it up now. And, the ultimate product is not going to really change. I don't care what they think. It's not going to change anyone's life. But the woman I was liaising with, if that's the right word, I think I had a positive impact on her because she needed another brain. And so that feels good. She was doing something a couple of days ago with PowerPoint. And I'm like, I'm really impressed how creative you are with PowerPoint. I go, it's actually making me feel like it's a weakness of mine. I got to buff it up. And then she looked at me and she said, okay, but that's not why you're here. I go, why am I here? She goes, because I needed another brain on this job. Wow. I said, okay, and I felt really good about it, because I thought, good, that's all they told me they wanted.
Right.
I just didn't think you could get paid for that. I only share that because if I could do that, and we can pay our mortgage, and we get to live near the beach in 15 or 20 years, and I'll really feel like I did something. There are books in the world, I have beautiful children, I'm really lucky. I always say that, it's embarrassing a little bit, like, again, I mentioned earlier, I'm not spiritual, I'm also not religious, but I really do feel blessed, even with all the weird stumbles the last couple of years. If we could figure this out, I would be thrilled. I really would.
What keeps you up at night?
The thing that keeps me up at night really is issues around social justice, which in a way doesn't affect my family, which I'm a little bit embarrassed about. What's become more and more obvious to me as I get older is that I'm really privileged and have been privileged, and it's important to check your privilege. And, but because of that, and I've only ever worked in nonprofits and done social services, so it's not like I was out doing other things anyway, but I don't feel like I've ever done enough, and I don't feel like collectively we do enough, and I have a million issues I care about, and you don't want me to be on the stump, so I'm not going to do any stumping, but there's a lot of things that upset me, and I don't understand it, and I don't mean to sound quite so simple either, since I have been in those policy meetings, and I have been lucky enough to go to the CDC and be involved in high-level conversations about violence. I've been at those places, and that was my goal. That was an early goal. But I don't understand how you can drive through Chicago and there are so many homeless people. And I don't want to have an argument with whoever you are that's a choice or they're drug addicts. Yes, all those things are true, but there's also abandoned buildings everywhere. To me, it's a national. There's a lot of things I consider a national shame, but that so many people have to sleep outside and that there are so many homeless children, that's the highest rising population. Something's wrong about that. Even if you gave me a list, not you, Roger, a list of 10 reasons why we can't fix that, even if I agreed with you, I would still say, but that's not okay. It's just not okay, right? Children sleeping outside at night. My kids go to Chicago public schools. The percentage of kids who are homeless that they go to school with, I'm overwhelmed by. And I don't want to hear about you, not you again, you tell me about their parents' choices. I just want you to talk about solutions. That's another thing, we've never talked about that. I'm super solution driven, always have been. And again, words help with that and stories help with that. So, those are the things that really keep me up. I don't understand how we can't, and I've done this poorly, by the way, how we can't have a more, civil discussion about guns. I don't understand that. And I'm not interested in your guns or taking them away. That's not the discussion. People walk into schools with guns. I don't want to hear the rest of it until we talk about that. And don't tell me it's about security guards. Of course it is, but these schools have security guards. And, so there must be some other dialogue that's being ignored. And, I find it very upsetting. I don't think and people want to make it a discussion about guns or whatever. I want to have a conversation about violence and what that means and to have that much rage. So that, those are things I'm up at night. What am I thinking about? And, selfishly, I think about my own children. But I really do think about, I used to work in Prevent Child Abuse America. We always said, they're all our children. You could be a parent, you could not be a parent. Your son is here. He's in my mind, and I don't mean this to sound weird, he's my child too. I care about him. I want him to go to a good school and be healthy and grow up to be a great guy like you, whatever, and your daughter, who I don't know, those are real things to me. It's when I'm up late at night, that is what I'm worrying about. Do people have a place to sleep? And do they have, healthy food? And, I have been blessed with all those things from the start, and there are just things we can do as a country and collectively and politically. We can do them differently, and this would be the one soapbox comment, only because I benefited from it recently. When someone tells me they hate Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, I honestly can't figure out what they're fighting against. I have had more friends who especially people like me who want to go out on their own. If there's no Affordable Care Act, there's no health insurance. I'm paying for it. Like, I'm completely shameless about this. Like, what is it one wants to argue about not everyone having health care? Yes, I made a choice not to be in an office, not entirely my choice. Yes, I'm now paying for Affordable Care Act, but how does it affect you, whoever you are? Like, don't we just want everybody to have health insurance? I don't understand that. Everybody does deserve health insurance. I mean, I might try to use myself as an example, but, you know, the fact that that's out there meant that I could take a chance. You know, so those are the things. Nothing keeps me up about money or my day job or will I be successful or will I find enough work. I'm up late at night when I'm up thinking about that, domestic violence, all these things. A lot of them are about violence, and that's what keeps me up. And understanding that not everybody has the same opportunities, and I find it very upsetting. I can't totally wrap my brain around it, and I can't totally wrap my brain around the idea that there's data that will tell you what to do, and then we can't do those things. I remember, I worked in the HIV/AIDS field back before protease inhibitors existed, so people, I don't want to end on a morose note, but people only died back then. So if you knew somebody, for the most part, that's where it was heading. And I just couldn't bear it. So first I volunteered at Gay Men's Health Crisis when we were in New York City, which was profound for me. And then I got to graduate school and they assigned me to an HIV/AIDS agency, and I worked there and did fundraising and ran a support group. And this is, again, before it was better to be managed. But one of the things I found fascinating was they would do needle exchanges. So people would get clean needles. They would turn in their dirty needles for clean needles. Now, if you want to argue about addiction, fine. I'm not an expert on addiction. But the science showed that doing needle exchange lowered the HIV rate and many other things that come with dirty needles. The science backed it up. Like, no one can dispute it. They wouldn't fund it. They wouldn't fund it because it felt like an addiction thing. And they still don't fund it, I think, for the most part. And I was right there at the time on the ground. And I thought, this is literally not just changing lives, it changes communities and it changes generations. These people have children, or they're going to have children. I just never understood that. And I think that's a blind spot of mine. Like, I don't understand why that's so complicated. People used to fight against home visiting when I worked in prevention of child abuse. Voluntarily offering a home visitor to a new parent so they could get additional support, as well as just basic lesson. Home visiting is one of the most powerful policy tools there is for children. The data, for the most part, only backs it up, and yet it's a fight. It's a constant fight. I can't make sense of that. You don't want someone to knock on your door and say, I know your mother lives in another state, or your parents, people like my wife and I. Now someone say, that's your choice. You didn't live near your parents. I would have loved someone to knock on our door. My older son had colic. Now he's this strapping, beautiful 16-year-old monster. But when he was a newborn, he cried almost all day for 9 weeks. I was hoping somebody would kick our door and not knock on the door, kick our door in and say, let me hold that kid for you. And when my mom would visit, or my in-laws, or my sister-in-law, it was like a gift from the heavens. And again, that's privilege. Like, I had that. I had people willing to fly to Chicago just to hold our baby. No. So anyway, I don't think that's what you wanted, but that's what I'm up at night thinking about, all that. That keeps me up.
If you were to take your cell phone out right now and make a phone call to the 20-year-old Ben, what would you say?
I would say think a little more about your plans. Don't give so much time over to having a good time, which I've always done. I'm a bit of a specialist with that. I would say just slow it down. You figured out how to get smart. You figured out how to study. And I would also say you've done a lot of things. Do all those things. Like, there were things that used to seem impossible, like a random trip or a volunteer opportunity. And now we have children and I make those things happen. So how did I make them happen at 20? So I would say, you want to learn how to make documentary films. You know a guy who works in a studio. I mean, he'll let you come in. Like, why do you feel too busy to do that? So I would just tell 20-year-old Ben to take a step back and realize nothing is so busy as you think it is. And not all the entertainment is worth the trade-off. I would just do it I would do it more like 40-year-old Ben. 20-year-old Ben I was a fan of. Again, I'm terrible for that. But I would say slow down, take all the opportunities. Don't just live big, live as wide as possible. I didn't really get going until 30. Everything went fine through 30, but everything started then. And that's someone who's already married and has a job and lots of good things and had already lived all over the country. But I would say take this 10 years and get started what you think you're starting in 10 years. Start it now. Start it now. You're good. It'll be okay. Take some chances. Didn't do enough of that.
Ben Tanzer, we were acquaintances in high school. We are now friends, and I appreciate your friendship, and it will continue for years to come. One last question before I let you go, and that is, what do you want your legacy to be?
I don't think a lot about that, but I will say this, because I think about this in relation to my children. I always had these big ideas for them, and I wrote about it, so everything's documented. If you want to ever name check me, just pull out the essay collections. I honestly feel, of all the things, if people said, you know, he raised two, I'm going to get choked up, I apologize. If he raised two really amazing kids, and they did things that changed the world, you know, if they were good people, if they were good spouses or significant others, if they did important things that have helped other people, I mean, nothing would be more important to me. I mean, really, nothing would be more important to me than that. I mean, I hope, you know, people say, wow, Ben Tanzer was an interesting guy. He really cared for everybody. He tried to be, you know, he tried to make the world a better place along with all the other stuff he was doing. I'd be thrilled. But if the boys were out in the world, if they were doing good things, if people said, wow, man, that Miles Tanzer, he just wrote that play. It really changed how I see the world. Or that Noah Tanzer, like he's a numbers guy and he helped us figure out that budget. And now, you know, 50 more families in this neighborhood are going to get services. I mean, that would be the greatest thing. It really would. It would, to create generations of people trying to make change and be thought leaders, and that would be really meaningful to me. You know, it really would. At this age, I can't imagine anything more meaningful than that.
Well, thank you so much for all your time. I know you're on a tight schedule today. You're traveling, but Ben Tanzer, thank you.
Dude, you're welcome. I loved this. I appreciate your interest, and this was wonderful. You know, you're catching me at a weird time in my life. It'll be interesting as a snapshot to look back on this in a year or 2 or 5 years and be like, wow, that's where you were at during that weird post-crisis phase. So anyway, dude, it's an honor, and we are friends, and I love that too. It makes me feel really connected to home, and I've always been a home guy, or a homer, whatever the phrase is. So it's nice to pull all that together also.
Awesome. And let's do it again.
Please. Love that.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, brother.